Good evening and welcome to tonight's work session. Today is Monday, May the 23rd, 2022. The time is 5:01 p.m. The work session of the City Council will now come to order. We have 3 items tonight to discuss. We have Mr. Michael Beasley and Ms. Debbie Wagner are here. And we have first quarter 2022 marijuana project discussion. And we also have a grant application update by Ms. Gillespie, who is our grant writer. So let's go ahead and get started with, I guess, Mr. Beasley, you want to kind of give us an update as to what's going on legislatively and
sure.
How much hair do you have left from the...
I have earned these bags under my eyes, that's for sure. It's good
You look
to
better
see
than the last time I saw you.
Yeah, it's good to see you. We made it. You know, one way of looking at it is that we've had basically 7 sessions in the last 24 months because during COVID they would stop and start. And this session was one where the legislature, decided to work its way through, although they did make remote testimony possible again in a more broader application, which folks across the state appreciated. But we had several COVID outbreaks while we're in session, especially at the first part. In the last couple of weeks, we named the big boards in the House of Representatives the COVID-tron, because you could always tell which legislators had COVID because all 10 or 12 of them their faces would show up, and you'd always want to look because you wanted to make sure they weren't just with you the day before. But we made it through, and it was quite a session. They introduced just under 700 bills, and they passed just about 8 out of 10 of those. So what that meant is for a number of reasons, we had a lot of bills towards the end of session. So when we were about a week and a half out, we had over half the bills were still alive that were introduced, and they were still in the first house, and specifically the House of Representatives, and in the Appropriations Committee when they had appropriations with them. So why is that? Well, because negotiations were ongoing throughout the entire session on how to spend federal funds. And I like to joke with some of them, I now know how Oprah feels because, I've heard that rich folks have a hard time giving away money, and these folks had a really hard time figuring out how to give away money. We're going to talk a little bit about that in greater specificity. But we also saw, really, not for the first time, but in a more significant way, we saw the threat of initiatives get into the heads of the legislature and the governor to a degree, and specifically related to the reduction of property taxes. And so you saw, in my opinion, a negotiation to withdraw property tax initiatives on the ballot in exchange for what the governor did in Senate Bill 238, just signed a couple of days ago, and that's a 2-year reduction of property taxes of around $700 million over the next couple of years. Keep in mind that's on top of the Tabor refund that the governor signed, I think maybe earlier today, or is today Monday? Mm-hmm. So he signed earlier today, which is that'll be a Tabor surplus refund of $500 per taxpayer or $1,000 per joint filer Tabor refund. And so, and on top of then how to spend federal funds that we'll get into in just a little bit. Most of those federal funds are not going into what I'll call one-time spending, but they will go into one-time spending and not ongoing spending, especially in behavioral health and housing. And we can talk about that in just a second. In fact, why don't we go ahead and I'll get right into housing. These were some of the last bills to pass, and again, I think because there was so much work done by the Housing Interim Committee that some of us talked about back in January. And there were a lot of cooks in that kitchen, local and state, public and private sectors, all trying to think about what can we do new and different as it relates to housing. And so I think you see some of that innovation in some of these proposals. You're seeing in House Bill 1282, and I always forget my numbers, so I'm going to look these numbers up. In Senate Bill 160, you see for the first time really an emphasis on what I'll call manufactured housing. As just as an important element of our housing stock as any other contributor to housing, and you're in those two particular bills, 1282, that is $40 million for innovative forms of housing, so that's prefabricated manufactured homes, modular homes. Senate Bill 160, which is kind of a new trend with this legislature anyway, and I talked about empowering people in mobile home parks on how to give them the financial wherewithal to buy the land that's underneath their home. Very innovative and something quite different. You're seeing, and I think what's the most important bill was House Bill 1304, and that ended up being about $178 million to both nonprofits like the Volunteers of America or a housing authority or entities like a city or a county to provide, housing grants, not only for that traditional, development or putting together the financial aspects, but also for the first time allowing you all to use these dollars to purchase land. That was one of the things that came out loud and clear in the interim committee process to say, look, if you cities, for example, were to buy this land, it would make it a lot easier to develop whatever is affordable in whatever community that conversation was ongoing. They put in $25 million into the Colorado Housing and Finance Authority to do what's called the middle income access program. So folks that don't necessarily qualify, and they're stranded between various financial assistance, either state, local, or federal, a way for CHAF to identify through their own processes ways to help those kind of folks kind of trapped there in between programs. They also extended the affordable housing tax credit. Representative Byrd actually just sent me a note on the car on the way down here. That bill will be signed on Thursday. And that's a bill that is the fourth time that tax credit has been extended. So if you're familiar with, again, Volunteers of America, all across the Front Range, housing, kind of connecting with leveraging federal funds to make those kind of projects possible. So very, very encouraging. Senate Bill 159 was $150 million, which creates a revolving loan fund that does provide that gap financing related to some of the gaps created with the affordable housing tax credit. You'll be hearing about that from developers. It also creates ways to make people a tool to allow folks to leverage more in terms of borrowing to weatherize their houses. So if they know that they're paying less on the utility bill, for example, they can go to the market and borrow more money on their own. I think it's something we talked about as a state off and on. There is some individual parts, some local governments throughout the state that try and offer that type of assistance, and this bill kind of codifies it at a statewide level. So when you're all said and done, your friends at the Department of Local Affairs and the Division of Housing are going to have around $500 million, give or take, of money over the next 4 years to work with all of you, again, the public and private sector, nonprofit world, on how to address affordable housing. Let me say this about that. Generally speaking, that's all good news. But I will say to you that the year and a half or so work in developing these bills was the easy part. The hard part is yet to come. And what I mean by that is, when I worked at the Department of Local Affairs, I had around 60 people in the Division of Housing. The Division of Housing needs to hire 60 people just to help implement these bills, as an example. And so what I'm concerned about, and what I think all of us have an obligation to do, is assist DOLA in getting these dollars obligated and spent out the door to meet these specific goals. Because I think it would be tragic to be in 2024, 2025, talking about how much money of this we're going to get back to the federal government because local communities weren't ready to to respond and obligate these dollars. So I urge Trinidad and all of you in the strongest terms, and I'm happy to help if we can. Let's really get to the Department of Local Affairs and with your housing advocates, and whatever your plan is, let's start advocating for it sooner rather than later, because I think that, you've heard that I'll start to get twitchy when you hear the word shovel ready, but I'm thinking not about just shovel ready, but a ribbon cutting ready. And I think that if you have something like that as part of your community vision, let's go advocate for it now, and let's get those dollars moving, because of all the things that you're seeing in the economy and these tight timeframes from the federal government, I just don't think there's anything more important than that. We ended up spending, let me ask, any questions on the housing front?
Questions? Go ahead.
House Bill 1304, you said I read it creates 2 state grant programs, correct? One of them is for investments in affordable housing.
It's going to be one pot of money,
Just one.
with all the flexibility to do things like facilitate affordable housing development, including the purchase of land, and to promote. There's been a growing concern that we have too much rental property out there, and we need to figure out a way to incent people to cross that threshold from rental to owner occupied. And so you're going to see a focus of those dollars on that as well.
Okay.
No questions.
No, nothing.
I'm wondering, Mike, I don't know if you have any input on whether or not we have the staff to do the thing that you're talking about in terms of working with DOLA. Do we need more staff that's focused on this issue to make use of this money?
Short answer, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a lot of money, a lot of, we don't even know how DOLA, I don't think DOLA has set out the rules on how we apply for this money. The legislature said, hey, here's a bunch of money, and now they're charged with, okay, how do we give this out fairly, and what are the rules, and how do we go about this? And then from our end, yes, we're going to need somebody to track those. We have Talitha, our grant writer, but the planning department is going to have to step it up as well. So.
Okay.
Good. Aaron?
I have no questions.
I guess as far as being able to get, we just have to get a hold of Tara, sit down with us and keep track with her, let her keep track of when these rules are coming down so that we are ready, or we're prepared to go after it when they do become available, and of course working with our economic development director as well as Talitha. I think that's important.
I'll just throw this in here. We just heard from Michael Yearman on the incentive program. If we can show the state that we're trying to incentivize as well, we can use that for match and leverage us. So yeah.
I think I have one quick question. That $5 million pot, that is total statewide dollars, right?
500.
500 million.
Oh, 500.
That's okay. That is largely.
Okay, that makes a big difference.
Yeah, we're in Oprah money. And so, and that's largely federal funds, so that's on top of the money that is already allocated in the state budget. So I'm going to be wrong, but I'm going to guess around just over $600 million. Because I think the state's at around $100 million level on the state housing line. So this is a transformative opportunity. And that was the goal of the folks that carried these bills in a bipartisan way, and it would be a shame to miss this opportunity.
Mike, are any of these bills, do they have any particular timelines, or just until the money's gone?
Well, I think the goal is until the money is obligated and spent, but you have to have most of these dollars out the door and done by 2026.
Most of this money that's available for different, like you say, for the rent and all that stuff, is it only available for municipalities and stuff like that, or is it available for developers and grants and other people that want to do it? How would they look into that?
So great question. So most of these programs are for the public and private sectors. So everything from Volunteers of America to a housing authority to all of you and everyone in between. And so it'll be important to tap into the Division of Housing within the Department of Local Affairs and really look for that grant guidance. And so for our city, for example, it'll be to really kind of not only bring your vision, but to facilitate, in my opinion, any other public or private sector's housing vision that you might have, not just here in the town or the county, but even a regional view, to really try and get those dollars obligated. Because again, this is the easy part. Then coordinating all of this and getting financing together and workforce together and you know, who knows what the weather will be like and all of those things, you know, that make this, you know, a Colorado challenge, I think is why I think we need to think about it today and in anticipation of DOLA's guidance. We can't just wait for them to tell you what it's going to look like. So I would get out your magic wand and figure out how you want this to work and how to realize your vision.
Okay. Mike, do you have any questions?
I do not.
Okay.
So if you don't mind, related to that, what we've seen, especially under COVID across the state, are more and more people not wanting to live, let's say, in Denver, right, and wanting to go places. And so that kicked off reinvigorated that chronic conversation about broadband. And so we saw legislation on broadband that built on what was done in the previous session that talked about putting, the governor has worked really hard, and I think it'll pay off in consolidating authority and power within his broadband office to get identify opportunities and get grant dollars obligated and out the door. I really think that's a significant goal. His executive order on the reviewing of grants and how that is done was actually codified in statute. So in this last session, that was one of the bills that they did. And so I think that as you kind of look at your chair with multiple legs, that broadband I'm sure is part of it. And if you want to not just maintain people that are here, or retain people that are here, but attract new residents and businesses, this broadband is really, I think, exciting opportunity for rural Colorado. And I know that you all have been, when I'm on the phone with Mike and the mayor and Debbie, it's usually one of the first things that comes up. So I do think broadband is another one of those things the city needs to anticipate, getting in and being ready to go. The governor has made, in addition to that, he's made some changes at CDOT to consolidate some of those in kind of like a trouble point to deal with trouble related to access to right-of-way and those types of things within CDOT, which in the legislative world that I live in, that was one of the bigger complaints about the deployment of broadband, is getting into CDOT's right-of-ways, those kind of things. So I urge us to continue to look at the results of this legislation, not just in the session that just ended last week, but before that, to really get ready, because many of those dollars are one-time federal dollars.
Like we've been looking at this already, just very concerned about trying to get broadband down here. We've been working about the past 10, 12 months, about 10 months already. Any funding that's in this, would any of this money, could this be used for a consultant? Because we feel like that's one thing that we do need is a consultant to guide us.
I don't recall. I believe that's more going to be, and I will get back to you with a more specific answer. I think more of that level of detail is going to be decided by the broadband office as part of what I'll call their rulemaking or their grant guidance. I don't believe the legislation talked about that specifically.
Because we don't have that expertise in-house here. We have an IT person, but we've talked a little bit about this, and we feel like a consultant is something that we're going to be needing to guide us through this process.
Ask a question.
Sure.
Is the money that in this legislation, is it for cities or counties to do broadband and then provide it as a utility, or is it private, for private industry to use the money to expand it, or both, or what is it?
It's my interpretation that it's both.
Okay.
Yeah, so for those communities that have made that decision, those local governments to get involved in that, as well as incentives to get in, and then also just a general streamlining generally of access to the right-of-way. And, because that ends up being one of the more expensive and time-consuming aspects of the development and deployment of broadband. And I think what the governor and the legislature and both political parties have tried to do is to say, this is a lot of red tape, let's cut through it and let's get stuff going. Again, because these dollars, I've been around, this is my 35th year around the legislative process. I've never seen this much money in the state budget. Federal, state, it doesn't really matter what color the money is. I've never seen this much money, so this is really an opportunity to really hit the ground hard.
We feel that this broadband is a huge issue, because like you mentioned when we first started talking about it, is to not only retain what we have here in Trinidad, but to expand it for these people that want to move out of the bigger cities and come to Trinidad and be able to work, from their homes or rural areas or whatever. So that we feel that's super important. Any other questions on broadband?
I got one question. Did we get a chance to talk to, I guess, the folks from broadband? Maybe they can come down and explain exactly what broadband entails in a more detailed, on this scale, at the large scale.
I can't speak for them, but what I can say based on experience and everything I've seen to this point, especially in the last 150 days or so around the state capitol, is you're going to see the state really come to folks like Trinidad and say, hey, what can we do to help in this new organized and directed fashion. So I do expect you'll see them sooner rather than later.
I think now that they pretty much, they're developing a whole group of people at the state level to help with broadband, and I think by reaching out to them, we should be able to get them down here.
Okay.
Let me add then, kind of related to growth and all of that. We talked about, my guess is, my forecast would be you're going to see more and more, as growth kind of is considered for the first time outside of those traditional growth corridors. You'll see more and more conversation around special districts or metro districts. Most of in fact, the two reform measures introduced this session on special districts or metro district reform failed. I do believe those conversations will come back again. We worked there's this balance between how do you have growth pay its own way and protect consumers at the same time to know what they're buying into and what their property tax obligations are, et cetera. I think that will continue on, and I will forecast for you that'll be one of the bigger topics next session for sure. Let me skip to the state budget. You've heard me say just a minute ago that I've never seen so much money in the state budget. I'll give you an example. Around 8 or 9 years ago, you hear in the paper we have close to a $40 billion state budget. But of that, about $15 billion is state revenue. So that gives you a good idea of how much money federal is in our budget. That same state general fund portion around 8 or 9 years ago was only about $7 billion. So it kind of tells you how the state budget has increased, and now you're looking at, as I mentioned a minute ago, a TABOR refund of $500 for individual filers and $1,000 for a joint filer, and you're looking at over the next 2 or 3 years refunding, I'm going to guess today, around $3 billion to taxpayers, which is quite a bit of money. At the same time, we're growing things like healthcare, K through 12, higher ed, and corrections at rates much greater than the 6% TABOR limit. So with that in mind, the general fund at the end of the year of Colorado will have a 29.1% reserve. That's larger than I can ever remember since TABOR passed. 1.9 billion above what's required in the 13.4% TABOR reserve. So TABOR, subject to TABOR refund to exceed Ref C, based on the last revenue forecast, and that'll change in July, is at $2 billion. Just for the year that we're about to go into. I think that may go down because there are folks that run around in my world that feel like the country and the state is slipping into a more recessionary period. And so you may see this kind of slow down revenues coming into the state.
That was my question. I was going to ask you if this is just an issue for this year and maybe next year the funding will be different. I mean, it's hard to forecast that, but it seems like all of a sudden we got a lot of money for the state of Colorado, and the conditions haven't been that great around here with the COVID and everything else. And it's kind of, to me, it's kind of wondering where we got all that money with. And I guess you're saying most of it come from the federal government, right?
That's right.
Are they doing this to other states? I mean, I'm just
They
kind
are.
of curious if the government is
They
issuing
are.
this stuff to.
You're definitely seeing this kind of federal incentive to help the recovery from the economic impacts of COVID. And they've even already extended in some of the ARPA funds from 2024 to 2026. And again, these are really transformative dollars. So how we spend them today and how you can spend them in a way that doesn't hurt your budget going forward. For example, one-time things that don't require an obligation, because not every state has TABOR in their budget, which means you can only grow at 6% every year. And so that'll be the challenge. I'm not sure I would want to be the next governor or a legislator in 2026, because these problems may come home to roost if it's a problem. But I promised Debbie I would be positive today. You've also, what else could we talk about? We could talk about one of the more controversial items this session was the fentanyl bill that you read about. That was a bill that has really, from the bill that passed in at the time I represented the Sheriff's Association in 2019, and law enforcement did predict not more crime necessarily, but they did predict more deaths, that this drug was really something that they had never seen before, and unfortunately that prediction came true. They tried to I'll use the word criminalize fentanyl. You're still allowed if a tiny element of fentanyl before you get into some what I'll describe as mandatory sentencing. And I just think that you'll hear from your sheriff and your chief about the effects of this legislation and whether or not it needs to be tweaked again, and whether or not it really wasn't a compromise at the end. It wasn't bipartisan as much. I had a handful of Republicans voting for it at the end. My guess is that this is a part of law that needs to be tweaked more. And some of that conversation leads into the behavioral health conversation about, are we doing enough to keep people off of opioids generally speaking, and some of the domino effect of that some of those policies sometimes allows for folks to reach out to illegal sources for these types of drugs. And I just, watching this bill was like watching, trying to predict what was going to be poured out of a blender. And it was messy, and the speaker worked really hard to pull people together on this bill. I'm not sure that it met the mark, but you'll be hearing more about that.
And I think that I got over in Mike's office, that 1 gram is now a felony, is that correct?
Yes. So, and we should, you'll hear more from your chief on that, on the specifics as it came out of conference committee and that. And I just think it's important to watch this. This is really one of those really unusual, and I have a reporter on my phone right now. I mean, people are comparing the summer we're about to go into because of the fentanyl situation and youth violence to what old people like me lived through in the summer of '93. And law enforcement that I'm familiar with are comparing the summer, hopeful that we don't go into summer of '93 and the summer of '22. And that fentanyl is a large driver of that type of violence. And so I hope they're wrong about that. We'll have to see, but I will forecast for you this will be one of those front burner issues in 2023. Sir?
Oh, I was going to ask you, will the state allocate more money for mental health programs because of the advent of...
There was a little bit of money here, but you also have to look in the behavioral health section of that particular bill. We've never seen this much money in this space, but whether or not we're spending it the right way in the right areas, I think the jury will find out. It's important for communities to experience and assess over the next 6 or 7 months going into the 2023 session what is working and not working in those bills so far, because in this case in particular, my forecast for you is a lot will need to be tweaked.
Any other questions on that?
Does any of that go into law enforcement?
Yes.
Okay.
And there was also a separate package of legislation. I was just at a signing ceremony on Friday with the governor at Smoky Hill High School in the Cherry Creek School District, where I believe that bill is $10 million of grant funding to local jurisdictions to help with some of the increases in different elements of crimes being committed. And so your chief and the county sheriff and others will be getting more notices on that, on how to apply for those grants. So don't wait for them to say, here's what's available. Think about what you need to fill those spaces and get ready to ask. And the worst could happen is they tell you no.
Why don't you cover some of the energy bills that were?
So this was one of the quieter years on energy. This session really centered around emissions, and not necessarily what I'll call climate change types of emissions, like carbon, for example, but more about what I'll describe as toxins. So the things that don't really contribute to greenhouse gases, for example, but might contribute to water pollution or air pollution that causes a physical harm, cancer, those types of things. And so House Bill 1244 was a major piece of legislation that worked on that particular area, probably the most significant on toxins. We've heard over the last few years a focus about the Suncor refinery in Commerce City, real close to where I grew up. But this is a much broader conversation. And 1244, actually, when it was first introduced, affected over 2,500 air emission permits in Colorado. So when I thought about that, I thought, wow, that's a whole lot of stuff I hadn't thought about. But it goes all the way down to like your local dry cleaner emissions. At least it was introduced. It was amended where it really didn't affect that. It was more of the larger emitters, and talks more about rulemaking and engagement by the Air Quality Control Commission on how to get into those impacted communities, that once the commission determines what are the up to 5 things, toxins that they want to look at, how to do monitoring. We had separate legislation, for example, that very clearly authorized, I believe it was Senate Bill 193, that authorized for the first time, what do you call it? Air using drones. Sorry, I hate technology. So using drones to, in addition to the vans that were funded, the couple of vans that were funded from the previous legislative session. So that kind of mobile air monitoring is something that's going to be seen more and more. Senate Bill 138 was branded the lawnmower bill. That bill ultimately died because that bill basically said that motors over a certain size couldn't be sold in Colorado. Folks lost their minds over that. And once it was called the lawnmower bill, you could see the wheels wobbling on it, because everyone wants to reduce emissions, but I really like my grass mowed, right, the way I want to mow it. And so ultimately it went from a mandate to get rid of those engines to an incentive to, for example, to replace those kind of fossil fuel driven devices. And ultimately that bill died on the Tuesday, day before the end of session at midnight, because it failed to be acted upon. So that's a very quick summary of the environmental space. This was less of a mandate session in the environmental space and more incentives. So for example, incentives to do microgrids, or to study or to look at microgrids for individual communities that are available not just for regulated utilities, but also co-ops as well, so that type of thing. So one of the more kind of bipartisan and stakeholder input session related to energy policy that I've seen in many years. So I hope that that trend continues. Questions about anything in that
What about
environmental?
the gas and natural gas and oil and mining in Colorado? Was there anything brought up about that?
Well, they were, those sectors were generally opposed to House Bill 1244 that I mentioned earlier. But there will be some impact to those industries with that particular bill, for example, but it's not nearly as impactful as some of the legislation you've seen passed in the last couple of years, going back to like Senate Bill 181 to some of the environmental bills from last session.
You know, Eli had a question before the session started, and he was asking about that bill, the marijuana bill.
Action
that,
22.
Well, there was a marijuana bill that allowing individuals to smoke
Right.
on the job, and that died.
That bill did die. I do think it'll come back. I think that's the second or third time that I can remember that bill being introduced. And again, the legal theory by the proponents is like, look, the voters have approved this, the courts have upheld it, and so you shouldn't be anyway penalized in your employment space. The opponents of that would say, look, I still have to read federal law, and I still have risk, and I'm getting these really nasty letters from my insurance carrier saying I can't have a certain level of whatever it is in my employee driving a forklift, for example. And so those were horrible meetings to sit through because both sides had very strong feelings about it. I do think they will come back. And I know the Department of Labor is going to look at studying this issue within their own existing authority.
You know, Mike, I know we can't cover all the ones we talked about earlier, but we can cover those ourselves later on. And,
Sure.
But a couple of things you want to mention is that protection for elected officials.
So that's House Bill 1273, I believe.
Yes, it is.
And so that is a bill that, so we've seen a trend over the last few years. And there was another bill, I believe it was House Bill 1041, that it already passed, and I don't believe that's on this list, but it should be. Where there are more and more threats made to people who work in the public sector. This particular bill, so that House Bill 1041 dealt with code enforcement folks, who have their home address posted on Facebook, or their kids, photos of their kids going into their school or what have you, because someone gets mad at them. So you have those kind of things going on in that space. We've passed previous legislations for, I believe there are 24, 25 government employees that have the ability to redact their information that is publicly recorded. So like the documents needed in your county clerk's office to perfect your lien, your title, or your deed, for example, your voter registration information. And so that bill 1273 builds upon those other examples that I just gave for election workers. And when you think about it, there aren't very many. The way the bill was originally drafted, if my dad had been an election judge in 1970, it could have gone back and concealed everything he had publicly recorded. So we figured that would be around 15,000 Coloradans. So that bill was narrowed down to current active election workers. We think that's going to be closer to 200 people, both for Title I elections at the county level as well as municipal employees as well. And we worked with the Colorado Municipal League to ensure municipal employees were protected from that. So before I give you a great sense of comfort knowing that that's how, that that's not online, what that does though mean is that those records are still discoverable by the public if they go into a public office. And you'll notice that this bill is tied to House Bill 1041 because we worked with the Title Association of the Municipal League, Colorado Counties Incorporated, to still make sure that title companies, lenders, and others could, if you were a licensed professional, could still get in and perfect those kind of documents without creating an obstacle to perfecting those transactions. So probably more than what you wanted to know, but that explains this bag under this eye, that particular bill. So.
Just because I know there's been some talk about the collective bargaining issue.
So the collective bargaining bill, which I think the governor was supposed to sign today, but I haven't looked into my emails yet today, started as a bill that was going to, through conversations with a couple of the unions and CML, CCI, Special District Association and others, was going to be a bill that included all of those local government entities in higher ed. But I think the proponents found that this bill was a lot like peeling an onion. And every time, you started with that onion that I just described to you, but you figured out what different costs were, different complexities were, or a lot of municipalities already offer that type of benefit to their employees. And so, but folks didn't want to, proponents of the bill didn't necessarily want to make any exceptions. So cities fell out of it, special districts fell out of it. And then folks read the fiscal note from higher ed from the last couple of years just on the adjunct professors. And it was in the hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars to implement that. And so ultimately it's a bill that only affects county governments. So if you see a commissioner, hug them. Some of them are still upset. But what I will suggest to you is this, is that this bill, I would argue, is one of the weaker in the country for collective bargaining for a couple of reasons. One, it does exempt cities and counties, so that's Broomfield and Denver. In my opinion, that's what it says. It also exempts home rule. There are a couple of those. You're going to see a bunch of counties go to home rule, or put that home rule question on it before their voters as early as 2022, and I would guess in 2024. But more importantly, everyone focused in the press about that home rule exemption, but really, to my mind, what's more important is a group could collectively organize at the county level, but commissioners still have the authority to say yes or no, no matter what it is. So I'm old-fashioned, I'll call that a veto. And so I still think commissioners have a veto in that. The no strike provision mirrors that applies to state workers. That's going to end up in court, but we'll see how that goes. It also exempted counties of 35,000 and less. This doesn't apply to them. So when you add those 20-some counties and the handful I just described to you, you already have half the counties that this bill wouldn't apply to. So are cities and towns next? I would say in the most definitive way I can, definitely maybe. I think we'll have to see what the experience is and how people like it and how the courts react to the statute. So that's what I would say about that.
And of course, we ourselves have 3 unions that we have collective bargaining going on all the time, so
Right.
we're already in that
Right.
area. You guys have any other questions, any particular questions about any legislation that you've heard about that Mike could answer or you feel maybe needs to be brought up?
I got one question about.
Sure. Does
that say anything about waste and toxic waste and I guess energy runoff or anything like that? What disposable waste, anything? Is that in the bill at all?
Is it in the bill?
Right.
In 1244?
Yeah.
So generically speaking, what that bill does is it says the Air Quality Control Commission will identify up to 5 toxins. And then they will start a monitoring process. And then as permits, like I described earlier, sunset or need to be reconfigured, the findings from those studies will then be applied to those new permits. Is probably the best way I would describe it. So I don't know yet, in fairness to the proponents of the bill, because I beat up on them pretty strongly for a variety of people that I work with and for, to say, why don't you just tell us what you're looking for, right? So, and their argument was this, and I don't disagree. So they started out with a bill that offended 2,500 permit holders in all the communities they live and work in. I would have felt like shrinking it down to just tell me what you're looking for and then I can apply it to those existing permits. Their response was, we don't want to be accused of going after a specific business or a specific industry. I think they were worried about it from a policy and a legal standpoint. And so I think you're going to have to see how that bill is is implemented, to see what they look at. And then if they want to create any new permits, that has to go back to the legislature in 2027. The senator from Pueblo was instrumental in crafting that compromise amendment. And so our new senator from Pueblo, and we'll just have to see how that's implemented. But this was a, and I don't know if my friends that are for this bill will listen to this, but I've said to them, this is kind of an example of how not to draft a bill. Because it was really like, we were in a meeting in Senator Gonzalez's office the night before the session. I said, you're asking us to fly an airplane while you're still building it. And it gave a lot of uncertainty in the public and private sectors. So the bill is amended. I know a lot of folks will ask for it to be vetoed. I think you'll see it being tweaked between now and 2027.
You'll notice that if you read the long portions of each bill, how a lot of them are written, it's kind of ridiculous in a lot of ways because they're so redundant in their language, and it's frustrating sometimes even reading through them. So
I think some attorneys get paid by the word.
I do.
I didn't go to law school.
Sorry.
And, but yeah, that was an experience. So
there was a bill. Did it ever get anywhere with the recycling?
So there was a compromise that I'm not totally familiar with. Literally the last night before the last night of session, so day 119, on the floor of the Senate that made it more of a study. But I know the proponents were generally happy, and the manufacturing sector that was worried about those fees was less unhappy. So we can get you some information on that recycling bill.
Mike, going forward, like I said, a couple of things. One thing is that we received your proposal, and we'll be discussing that probably I'm not sure, next meeting, regular session. But one thing going forward, I was looking at the interim committees that maybe would hurt to keep track of and keep us informed. That legislative interim committee on judicial discipline, the oversight committee concerning tax policy and task force, also the sales and use tax simplification task force, of course the transportation review committee, and the water resources review committee. I think those are some of the things that I saw that I think that wouldn't hurt to kind of keep us informed going forward on, if you would, please.
And we attend or suffer through, depending on when you ask, all of these meetings, and so we'll be able to send you notes on those as they go through. And I will say that being in an election year, you really won't start to see a lot of this stuff start to take shape until after Labor Day. I think a lot of folks are going to get through primaries, then the landscape, then leadership will be comfortable in moving forward with appointments to these various committees, and then they'll be back in January.
Okay. Mike, thank you very much.
Thank you. May I conclude?
Mike, you have something else?
Oh,
Go ahead.
go ahead.
Well, I just want to conclude by saying how lucky you all have been to have Debbie Wagner helping you. And I know that I think I scared her a few times, or at least injected concern when, after she called me to say, would I help her transition this contract. It means so much to her, the work that you all do and the things that you're trying and the values, trying to develop and the values that you put forward. And this is important to her, so it was important to me. I have, as I always have over the last 30 years, learned every time I talk to Debbie, and you all were very lucky to have her. Yeah. And so we will not be able to do the same job that she did, but we will always try. And I'm always open for answers and very grateful for Debbie's phone call.
Mike Nesson.
You know, the lobbyist very eloquently stated what I was going to say. Debbie is right there, and she is done the end of June, and she's done great work for us.
Why don't you come forward? And do you have anything else to add to it? First of all, I say, Debbie, it's I know it's short.
No, Mayor, it's been a pleasure to represent
It's been a pleasure
Trinidad,
working with you.
and I really have appreciated working with all of you, and will miss you. and hope to stay engaged in some way with the city and keep in touch with people. It's
I know you've
it's
been a
been a real
tremendous-
honor, and Mike will do an incredible job for you if you continue to work with him. He's wonderful to work with. I've known him for 20-some years. Yeah.
I was too.
It's been wonderful having you on board, you know, for the community. I know you've done quite a bit, you know, for me, whenever I go to Denver, you always ask questions, who do you want to meet, who do you need to see? And you've always been able to connect me, so that's what, that's
Thank
the
you.
thing that we kind of expect from Mike.
Door is open, and if Mike's out of the country, or I'm happy to step in and answer some questions.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Have a safe trip back home.
And there's one other comment I will make.
Sure.
There may be board and commission appointments that Mike would, I'm sure, be happy to, if any of you are interested in applying for board or commission appointments or sit on an advisory committee, I'm sure Mike would be happy to help you with that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And then finally, we would say thank you to Mike for answering our call every time I called, actually. Even the late calls to say, what in the world am I doing here? And or am I reading this right? And so we appreciate everything that you've done and the direction that you gave us, and we're happy to answer your questions.
Okay.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care now. On item 2, first quarter 2022 marijuana project discussion. Cheryl?
Okay, so council should have received the first quarter marijuana requests in the drive, along with 17 staff requests and 1 board and commission request. The amount available for allocation, $749,463 for the first quarter of 2022. Of that amount, $599,463 is available for allocation, and that includes $389,651 for city projects. Just briefly, at the top of the spreadsheet, I broke out the the amounts that were collected in 2019 through 2022 in the first quarters. So for fair comparison, we would be comparing 2022 with 2019, because we know 2020 and 2021 we were in that COVID wave. The COVID wave didn't actually settle down until third quarter of 2021. So for comparison, sales in 2019 were $11,870,000, and in 2022 sales were $11,632,000. And comparing sales tax that's generated from that for marijuana, it was 2019 we collected nearly $764,000, and in 2022 we collected $749,000. So as stated earlier, 17 staff requests were submitted to council for their review, as well as 1 board and commission request. And that leaves a remaining of $23,979 for incentives, and nonprofits to be allocated $5,995. And finally, that the 30% to be allocated to the rainy day fund, $179,839. So staff is available for any questions that you may have after you reviewed their detailed requests. And I'm going to let you take it over.
You know, thank you for giving that detail. I know that was something that Karen had been looking for some time, just get some detail on some of these items that were being asked for, so it was good to see. Questions, Mr. DeBono?
Oh, Cheryl, you know, when the boards and commissions, Historic Preservation Committee, the 23,000, the arrow goes from, is that just, they've not moved over, or is that just?
Right, usually there's a couple other boards and commission requests there, so yeah, that's it. It's just 23,000 moved over.
Okay.
Okay, I have a, just procedural questions, Cheryl. So like for the interactive, now I kind of see the process that you go through because we've never seen this detail before. So like for the city interactive stools, the department that's requesting it is gas?
Well, Steve and Audra were working on the Christmas decoration projects together,
Okay.
and this just kind of came out of that.
Yeah,
Audra roped it in.
Me and Audra were discussing how to get tourism and get interactive,
Okay,
kind of some stuff for tourists to take photos and different stuff like that.
okay.
And she had showed me some stools and we had talked about where we could place them and doing things like that. So that's why gas is on there because I'm the
Yeah.
gas director. And we had just talked about it and
Okay.
she said we should ask, try to see if we could get some marijuana money.
Okay, so why is it assigned to the gas department? Shouldn't that be tourist?
Well, she has something about economic development there.
Oh, okay.
That would be a need for economic development.
So you were the guy that showed up and you got it?
Yeah, I was the one, I was the sucker to get, come up here and explain what we're trying to do.
Okay.
So it's just an interactive thing that we want to
Yeah.
put some not bar stools, they're stools.
Yes,
And we were talking about maybe in the parks at the Central Park Lake, we could put some, and maybe by the walking trail, and different places like that. Just to try to get tourists interactive, and then when they leave, they could talk about it and talk to their neighbors and maybe get them down.
and then there's some of these, I don't know which request it was, but on some of these, you're saying that this expense, I don't know which one it was because I read through them all, but the request was actually covered through the budget, through a contingency.
No, it was not. So we do have a contingency line item, and it's typically contingencies established as 1% of the operating revenues. And we put that in the budget as a safety, as a reserve.
Right.
The items purchased already through contingency were items that we needed, and we had to
Okay.
move forward with them. So we used the contingency amount, and if approved this evening, we'll backfill the contingency to have it available for the rest of the year.
So the contingency was basically used for like emergency situations.
Typically, or uncalculated or unbudgeted items, things that come up, what we have no idea to plan for.
Okay,
Yes.
I got it. Okay, I have no further questions.
No questions.
Are you answering the questions about everything?
If you have a specific a project, they're here.
I think the thing that stood out to me was the stools, just because it's colorful and it's really nice to have this detail. It really does help. The question that came to my mind, though, immediately was, is this something that's coordinated with tourism? Is it something that's coordinated with any marketing plan that we have for the city? Because it seems a little random, and I'm just wondering if those conversations were held to see whether or not it fits within a message that we're trying to put out there. And that I wasn't clear on.
So that would probably be a question for Audra. I don't believe that she's coordinated with any of the boards and commissions. This was just something that she saw. Oh,
Yes. Yeah, we were talking about tourism and trying to incorporate something interactive with the city, with tourists, where they could take photos of their kids or themselves on it, and then.
What I'm asking though is, have you coordinated this proposal with something that tourism is putting out there as?
No, I don't believe we have.
Okay, because that seems like that would be a good idea. I don't know what the theme of the stools are that you're proposing, whether it's silly animals or whether it's something that's more pertaining to Trinidad, but I wanted to see something more about that.
Okay. Yeah, and what we were doing was looking like down at the lake at Trinidad Central Park Lake, is they had some frog stools with the frog legs, ducks, and something that kind of fits in that theme. And then there's the ice cream, where maybe we could put it somewhere over on Commercial Street or by one of the ice cream parlors somewhere.
Is that, I'm sorry, go ahead. Is that considered a capital improvement?
It's, and it's less than 5,000.
And I think just to kind of, I don't know, but to clarify, because Audra and I were talking about doing something interactive with Christmas decorations this year. And I think that's where that,
Yeah, I think
they
that's
kind of
where-
evolved from that.
Exactly.
I don't necessarily think it's a bad idea, I just would like it to seem, have it more of a theme that goes along with whatever the tourism message that we're trying to get out about Trinidad.
Okay.
That's all.
Can you tell me more about the Common Center meeting room? What is that?
It's the community center meeting room.
Okay.
Yes,
Was it needing upgrades or you were trying to?
yes.
Very,
It's
very much so.
it's a step back into the 70s if you've been there. Yes.
Very much so.
That would not be part of the, okay, never mind. I see it.
Yes.
Aaron? I was noticing specifically the CBA, the buddy breather system, all of the safety equipment. I wouldn't even call it safety equipment, that's necessary equipment for the fire department. It seems to me that a lot of that stuff keeps coming up. I really think it's important, as I'm sure you guys do too, that you guys have all of your tools that are necessary for the job. Are we replacing things as they're needed, or are we getting things that we should have had in the past and there's still more out in the future?
It's the second one. We should have had this stuff. Remember I told you I have one engine that doesn't have any equipment on it.
Okay.
The 3 SCBAs are for that engine. I have ISO kind of breathing down my neck to do a survey in town, and that's required equipment that we don't have.
And I want to be super clear. I mean, I think that's a great idea that we did it, but it'd be nice too to know what was future needed to.
And I'm putting those together as we're working on these engines that we're purchasing. So I'll have an equipment list of everything that we need to outfit and meet the standard. As far as the buddy breather system and the batteries, I think I gave you a detailed thing. Right now, that's kind of a safety issue because we're just buying batteries and putting them in there. And if they're half full, they're half full. And then if we have a call and somebody gets entrapped in a building, I'd rather have them have a full battery at the start of
I
shift.
totally agree. I want to be very clear about that. I definitely support it. It'd just be nice to see like a future list. 'Cause I'm asking in a sense out of concern, like we want that equipment to be there, and
And again, I invite you to come to the fire stations and I'll go through each engine and explain everything to you and what we're missing and what we do have. And,
all right.
I mean, you guys have been great with Chief Howard and with myself trying to get us up to where we need to be, but we're still a little ways.
Okay.
And actually, Chief Bacharach created a wish list. I think it totaled 124,000.
Yeah.
But he prioritized and we picked the top
We're just
2 or
gonna
3.
try and do it as we can.
For this round, he picked the top 2.
Well, it's good to know that there's that dollar amount that you're looking at this point in time. And of course, we know that cost could change, but at least we have an idea that's what you're looking for.
Yeah, prices are always going up. You know that, so.
And anything else?
I have nothing else, Mayor.
Okay. I think an answer to your question about that, the interactive stools with the tourism. I think tourism meets this week. I think what we do is not necessarily put a hold on this dollar and maybe we approve it, but make sure that the tourism board is on board. I think that's what you're looking for, is on board to be able to use these for the tourism in town. I think that's what you're really looking for, am I right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And like I said, if the tourism meets this week, I'll bring it up.
Okay, thank you.
And I think Marty is here too. She's the one question that I had is that Los Angeles County hiking guide of $5,000. Who's administering that? That's a combination between tourism and us allocation, and the tourism board will be Here comes the man.
I don't know about the man, there I go.
So you'll be overseeing the,
Yeah, so
This is-
tourism allocated $5,000, but the whole project will come out of the Office of Outdoor Rec, the design and the layout and all that kind of stuff.
so you'll be doing the work on that?
That's correct.
Internal, okay.
Yes, sir.
That was my question. Okay. Let's see if I had anything else. No, I didn't have anything else on that, so.
Yeah, I have,
Sure.
I have more of a statement than a question, because about 3 weeks ago, they started doing the publications on the marijuana sales in Raton. And it just didn't add up from what we were hearing from some presenters in here, 20%, 28% reduction. But really, so what they were saying is the marijuana sales in Raton were something like, I can't remember if it was 62,000 or 26,000, but they only garnered like $613.
It's pretty small.
It was very, so I couldn't figure out why these figures didn't compare one with the other. Well, now I see it, because we're just a little bit off. We're not a lot off.
Right. So April figures are coming in now. We posted majority. I think 4 shops haven't reported it, and one of them is a big shop. So if we kind of guesstimate and use those figures and, you know, throw some projected numbers in, I'm thinking we're going to collect 15% less than we did in April of 2019. And that's about $60,000.
And that's what I think you projected, I think.
Right. I mean, it's not that we shouldn't be willing and ready to try and assist the marijuana industry in Trinidad, but I don't think it's as dire a situation.
I would add that that's presuming that Raton is our big competitor. And if you're thinking that we're drawing people from states as far away as Texas, there are other places they could stop besides Raton. There are lots and lots of dispensaries in the Albuquerque area.
But if you look at the sales in like Hobbs, New Mexico, the areas probably Trinidad wouldn't be their market anyway. I'm sure we're losing some Texas clients, but somebody told me, I have no idea about the marijuana prices, but they're saying for a gram of marijuana or whatever in Raton is $200, and the going price in Colorado is $120. And I'm not saying we don't have to be vigilant, but we have to be realistic about these figures too.
Absolutely, but I think it's important that we recognize that it's not just Raton.
No,
The majority of them.
The one market that I think that coming in would be Clayton.
Right.
Yeah.
And other kind of marijuana tourism that might take them to places like Albuquerque or Santa Fe, or I think that it's something that we have to keep in mind that it's not just to come here for marijuana, it's to come here for outdoor recreation and everything else that we offer.
We're the combination plate to their one item in.
There you go.
That's a good way to put it.
We have a smorgasbord.
So, one more question. So for finances, even with marijuana money or any general finances that the city has, you're saying pretty much 2020 and 2021 is not an average for anything?
No, we
You're
can't
not
use
going to
that.
plan on?
We can't use it. It's a complete and entire anomaly. And when COVID first hit, Mike had actually dropped all the rates
Right.
far below than what we received.
Right.
And then when we started receiving the money, it just made 0 cents. Every dollar was being spent on marijuana.
Yeah.
I cannot even imagine how that happened. But yeah,
That's good to know.
the second, third, and fourth quarter of 2020 were outstanding.
Yeah.
So, but we can't compare
I think what it boils down to is that, you've always been, when you do your budget for the marijuana funds, you've always been very conservative
Yes.
as to what you feel is necessary, and I think, as long as we fall in line with that, I think we're okay.
Right, and it's too soon to tell,
Right.
April's the first month, I mean, by July, we might see some better telling signs, but July is our biggest month, so you just don't know.
I have one quick question. Mike, I think it'd be Mike that'll know, the Arroyo cleanup project?
Yes.
75K, how much of that project is that gonna, how much of the Arroyos will that address? And if it's not all, how are we gonna decide which?
Go ahead, Bob.
That's a good question.
Better be Nevada.
Well, the one that's probably the worst right now is the Pinyon Canyon. Comes out of Pinyon Canyon Dam, it runs down.
Yeah.
Back of Kansas, crosses Kansas. So, but we have got to address our, the river right here, the Purgatory River. It's way overgrown. And I'm sure parts of Fisher's Peak has gotten overgrown as well. So.
Yeah, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but
Oh, you're fine.
last year, they were talking about bringing the Purgatory Valley Association deal to have some kids come in and do some river wood cutting trees and that, where they had started down on the end of Linden. Are they gonna continue doing that? Or is that project gone, or?
You know, Karen's in the audience tonight. You know Karen, if they're coming back?
Yes.
Would that, now that will help, right? Clear up some of
Right.
that? I mean, what area are they planning on doing?
That's like Bob said, we have river issues, and that's separate, obviously, from Arroyos.
Right.
But yes, that project is ongoing, and that's GOCO grant money.
Well, one of the things that we have at our disposal now is, we bought that piece of equipment a year ago, and we had to utilize it, and it's like a track hoe, and it has a mulcher or whatever at the end of it, which is, we're able to use it to clean up, like I said, the river bottom. And it does a good job, and it does it quickly. The big thing that we've been asked by the irrigators is that when we do that we let them know that we're doing that, because any of that stuff that is, if it gets washed down, that they're able to open up their irrigation canals to let it go by or whatever. That would be the only issue that they saw with it. But we do have that piece of equipment that would go by and do quick work of what the problem is on the bottom of the river.
Yes, that is the intent of the.
Yeah, but it only does the small stuff. We still have to get the trees cut.
That is correct.
I think it would cut a bigger tree, won't it, Mike?
Up to 12-inch calipers with the forestry head is for. So we started in the boulevard.
Right.
And we had, fire was helping us. They were cutting down some of the bigger stuff, and the machine was working really well. And then we, through different projects and whatnot, we're out of the boulevard right now, but it's on our radar to go back in as soon as we get patching and some of these more visible items completed, painting, curbs, stuff like that. So we want to get back in there, as well as we want to get back up to the golf course, and we've got some dead trees to take care of up there as well.
Anything else? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Cheryl.
Sure.
So not to get in the weeds, but I think your question was, how did we come up with that 75,000? It was kind of, we threw a number out there. In the past, we've done a section there between Nevada and state, and we kind of interpolated to come up with that number based on the length of these arroyos. So.
Item 3, grant application update. Ms. Gillespie, what do you have for us?
Council, I came before you for an application for a CDOT grant in February for a multi-use path along Santa Fe Trail, 10-foot wide path separated from the roadway with pedestrian level lighting. And this week we did receive that grant. Well, we were awarded that grant. We haven't yet received the grant. Yeah, it hasn't officially been announced, but I just wanted to give you all that update.
Thank you.
How much was that dollar amount for?
1.8 million.
Wow. Good job.
Nice work.
Good job.
And while we're talking about CDOT grants, the Riverwalk lighting project finished 2 months ago. So I don't know if you've all had a chance to check out those lights, but they did a great job.
I'm sorry, where are they?
On the Riverwalk
The Riverwalk.
between
Oh, yeah.
Cedar and Minton.
They are really nice.
Yeah. So that's just to give you an update.
Oh, good. Well, it's good, great to hear about the project on Santa Fe Trail.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great.
I heard about that. It's pretty strong, so it's good to hear. Right. Yeah, anyway. All right, any other items of discussion? Everyone wants to speak? Mr. DeBono?
Nothing right now, sir.
Here.
I'm brain dead, nothing.
All right.
I got a couple. Won't take too long. I already talked to Chief Glorioso and Mike about putting some radar and of course, just said they just got some of that in for the speed controls. But I'd like to see if we could get a couple permanent ones put up, in the Allendale area, because it's really bad. And on Colorado, we've had a temporary one, but they take it off. And if we left one there permanent, and I don't know exactly what they got in as an order, but I think that would be something real important, because the traffic is just terrible out there speeding. And the lines for the street, did we get anything done on that as far as the painting goes? Because nobody knows exactly what's going on with that.
Yeah.
You again?
Hi again. We're actually putting together, Nadine's been working diligently, putting together a striping, pavement marking plan as we talked. We went up and talked to CDOT, actually not CDOT, but Flatirons, because we had a question about the product that CDOT's using and whatnot today. It was the superintendent, Steve Graham, and we should have that project. It's going to be real close to being ready to go out. We got to go out to bid, but we're going to address center line, we're going to address crosswalks, we're addressing turn arrows, all that in this project. So it's on the. It's just a matter. It's going to be over 50 grand, so we've got to go out to bids on it. So.
Do you have a timeline that you might want to try to get that done?
Yeah, we want to get it out as soon as possible, literally in the next week. And but that means we still have the bid process. It's going to take time to retrieve bids and.
So we're probably looking at maybe end of July, August by.
If we're lucky, I hope if it goes, because maybe we can break ground middle of July, 1st of July, if we expedite it.
Would that be Flatiron doing that? Bidding
No.
on that, or they don't do that? It's just
They have a sub that did all their.
right.
And they also ground in their specifications, they recessed all their line work on the new exit 11 roundabout, which would be nice, because then when we plow, we don't knock them off. But it's going to add more cost to it.
Well, it's worth it if we don't have to keep doing it continuously.
Yeah, and we want to use a different product. We're looking at an epoxy-based paint this time.
Nice.
So.
Yeah, it sounds durable.
Yeah.
Squeeze it there.
My other point is, we've been talking about trails. Everybody wants trails and that. We own 100 acres or more by the dam, by the dumps on the hill, the trail up there, and part of Simpson's Rest. Why can't we work on putting some more trails up there and developing the road? And he left. Developing the road and putting a bike path up Simpson's Rest, and even consider putting a park. Now, years ago, we had planned on that. We had a guy come in and Gail Eaton from the monument work come and sprayed all the graffiti off with a sandblaster, and we were going to put a park up there, and we in fact really put some lights down below on the bottom of the face and was spotlighted it, and it really looked nice. But of course we had an issue with vandalism, people throwing rocks off it, busting the speakers. But I think that would be a good attraction, and that's part of the history of Trinidad Simpson's Rest. And I think, we could put some trails up there, and we don't need to ask anybody for access. We have it. We can do what we want. We don't have to go out looking for stuff. And that's I think it's 120 acres, isn't it?
It's roughly 120 acres that we purchased.
And we could put a lot of trails on that, and bicycle trails, and that you know, and make a nice park up there. I think that'd be great.
That is part of the overall GOCO grant that we were seeking and still are trying to get to expand the wormhole trail and do some maintenance and work on the wormhole, but also expand it into that property. So it is in the works.
Yeah, I think we should work harder on it, because everybody wants trails and that, this would be something that we showing that we really want to do Trinidad as a tourism place, and the road up there needs to be taken care of.
That's a county road.
Well, but I'm sure the county would work with us on that. They want to be tourism too. And if we could get that road paved or whatever, something, and make a nice bicycle path, that's a pretty good height from down here on the bottom. And I think that'd really be nice.
You know, Frank, when I did my State of the City address, that was one of the things that I did address as far as recreation, was try to do something with Simpson Rest.
I know.
Try to take care of that, but you're right.
We've always talked about it, we need to actually.
We probably ought to have a work session point on that, Mike. I'm not sure if you'll be here then, but at some point we talk about it.
Yeah. You can stay here and come back for that one.
No, thank you.
No, that's it for me, thank you.
I was encouraged to hear about all the money that's going to be out there for affordable housing, and I think that as we learn more about it, that it might be worth a work session to talk about the various programs that are out there and whether there is land the city might consider buying that would be supportive to put affordable housing on, or whatever other things. We should definitely not let this ball drop. I think that would be really important. And then the other thing, it kind of ties into my what I was talking about the stools. I feel like we're getting a better vision for what we want to put out as our presentation to the world about that we're outdoor recreation and creative arts and a healthy lifestyle. But I don't know that we have any kind of a, it feels a little still like herding cats, you know, like everybody knows this is what we're doing, but do we have a plan? And maybe we do, and I just haven't seen it. But I would really like some professional input and consultation about how we message and how we get a marketing game going that would drive people here for those things. I think we need to be a little bit more proactive about that than we have in the past. And I understand, you know, we're not suffering quite yet with regard to marijuana, but we will eventually. Eventually it will. There are already just scores of dispensaries in New Mexico. It's not going to take them long to catch up, and they're learning from our state, and so I don't think it's not going to take a long time. So we've got to, like you were saying, make sure people understand we're the whole meal. We're a place you want to come for more than just a day. You want to be here for a week even, to do all the things that are here. So I just think we might want to consider hiring a marketing person or somebody who has specialized skills and ideas for how we can get that out.
You know what, Mike, just to add on to what you're saying, maybe we should, on one of our work sessions, have the tourism board come up and tell them what they're doing, because they're actually the marketing arm of the city. I mean, it's a revenue generating.
I think that's part of it, but also in terms of our branding for the city, you know, we've got to think through all of that to make sure that it's all a cohesive message.
Yeah.
When it comes around to my turn, I've got something that might answer some of your questions.
Thank you.
Okay.
I have no questions, and I'll wait too.
I like the energy about the trails and everything, and I mean, I requested the last city council meeting, that work session, and it sounds like we'll be speaking something towards that, so I'll wait to hear what the mayor says. I think it's a very positive step forward, and I think we really need to just really capitalize on all of that. I'll wait to hear what you have to say on that. So.
One of the things that talked to Mike about, and of course, we have this DOLA grant for $300,000. That's supposed to, that's with the county, that we all, there was the TPL, Nature Conservancy, ourselves, and DOLA.
County.
And
Yeah, it's a DOLA grant.
Yeah. So we have a $300,000 grant, and the purpose of that grant was to look at the entire visioning for recreation in the area. And you and I've had that discussion about maybe a work session in particular about how do we make this a destination point? What are the people in the community? What can they tell us that they would like to have? And I think that's where you're coming from. Now, Mr. Valentine, I know that you attended the last meeting with, I guess that was the first meeting that we had on that DOLA grant.
Right.
Would it be beneficial for us to do a work session ourselves up front and then take that visioning to the DOLA grant meetings so that they have some ideas to what we're thinking of and what some of the citizens are thinking? What do you
Sure.
think?
So the process, the firm that was selected was THK.
Right.
They're the ones that did the master plan for Fisher's Peak. So I think a lot of you were involved in one way or another with the stakeholder group meetings. They're mirroring that process with this process. So we had our kickoff meeting, and then they'll start reaching out to stakeholders. As far as, I mean, it's always good to have, council give their input to take to that.
I guess what I'm saying is just to kind of develop maybe a local stakeholder group where they can come in here, we can sit down and talk and throw some ideas back and forth. I think that's the idea that you had, so that we could take to the DOLA grant visioning.
I understand what you're saying. I don't want to take over the process. I'd like the process to go through, but I think I'll talk to the team, but maybe one of the meetings for that process should be right here. That way it's all encompassing and not us going off this way and then saying, here's what we said. So I'm trying to, you put me on the spot here, man. So I'm trying to figure out what's the best way so that we get our input and the input of all the stakeholders.
When is our next meeting that they're?
I don't have that yet there.
Let's find out, and then would that work for you, what you're talking about? If we can have one of those meetings all together here, I think have that DOLA meeting here, and that way we can invite the public and public engagement is what we're talking.
So that would be a work session then?
Probably a work session together with, DOLA, for the DOLA grant.
I think so.
Yeah, it may not be next week or whatever you're talking
No,
about.
yeah,
but in the
and,
future.
yeah,
But at least,
it takes time in city government.
but at least we're working toward that direction, so that's what we're talking about. The only thing I had, Mr. Valentine, was this is, I'm sure one of you have been by 5 Points and that station or that store, and I went by yesterday or today and I talked to the people at JR's, and I told them that we had that piece of equipment. And he said if we would be able to do that, I said, you guys can go paint, we could do the brick, but you guys can do they can put new paint on the wood, and they're open to it. So if you want to get with Charlie, and they can call.
I will.
You call JR. Actually, Jimmy, JR is on vacation. You might talk to Jimmy.
And we can help out, but it's also the property owner's responsibility to take care of that as well. I'll just mention that,
Sure.
It's not always the city, I mean.
That's right.
Can I ask a question here with Charlie? Can you come up here for a minute? So I want to ask, just put some input here. I know we're having a lot of problem with vandalism, and it's really hard to deter it because of everything else. Years ago, we used to have a tip line in that. Would it be worth our investment to put out some reward money for information leading to the person that's doing this and the conviction?
When he makes the world go round.
It does, and I don't know, I'm just kind of thinking that maybe that would help a little bit, because it's very difficult, and they've been doing a lot of it all over. I mean, it's terrible. And, you know, people rat on people and stuff, and maybe the incentive is some money reward that might be worth doing that.
Well, you know that, when I was talking to Jimmy, because JR was not there today, but Jimmy was saying that in their stores, and there's one guy in particular that's doing this, because he uses the same, you know, language or whatever, and they're going into their stores and some of their equipment, this guy is in the bathrooms and all over, and he's just scratching the same thing that he scratched up there, so it's the same guy, and how do we catch him?
Is it, I mean,
Yeah,
would that
we
be
can do
something
it.
worthwhile for
There
it?
was an issue with the money one time before about how it had to be funded and who it funded through. I don't remember. Do you remember last time
I
we brought that up?
don't remember that issue, but it rings a vague.
There is something legal-wise we gotta do it where, I don't know if it could come through the police department or the city. Because we looked at that once before, a few years back.
Do you think it would be worth looking into?
Yeah, we definitely look into it.
Charlie, did, you know, that incident that happened that I was talking about at JR's store, do you guys have a camera on
We
that?
do, and we looked and it
Not-
didn't come through the camera view.
Okay.
And you'd be surprised how quick that graffiti goes up. You would think that would take a long time to do. It doesn't.
They're fast.
They're pretty quick.
I'll look into what
Yeah, we will.
Councilman is saying. Okay, thanks.
Mayor, if you can
Sure.
remind me, I did have one thing I'm sorry about earlier. Recently, I'm sure.
For me?
Sorry,
Oh,
sure.
okay.
Thank you, Chief. I'm sure you guys have probably seen or read where School District 1 is planning on doing that consolidation with their campus. I was thinking, I don't know how many of you have been party to, but Frank, you probably see the pickup and drop-off lines at the elementary school up at
Yeah.
Fisher's Peak. I mean, if they're now moving that to the high school and Park Street campus is my understanding, I mean, we're going to be concentrating a tremendous amount of vehicles into a neighborhood that already has a lot of trouble with it. I think that, I don't know how we liaise with the school board to be part of that discussion, but I really think we're setting up for like,
Yeah.
all right.
So actually, Chief Bacharach brought that question as well as Nick Monterano, because he's the PD's resource. Thank you. So he came in last week. I was out. I told he hasn't got back in, but what I'd like them to do is bring us a plan of their drop-off, because you're right, that campus was not designed for a drop-off like Fisher's Peak is. They have, as you know, they got a bus drop-off, they have a car drop-off up there. Trinidad High kids would come, park, and completely different operation. We're anticipating that they're probably gonna be backing up on Hillside and what's the one west? Is it West Street? Or what's the one that's?
West.
It is west. It's just west of the front door. So, but that being said, 8 o'clock in the morning, we have, there's 3/8 of a mile to a half-mile cars up there at Fisher's Peak. They back up before they come in. How does PD or fire get in there if there's an emergency? Very good question. So, it's been brought to our attention, but we've asked them to come back to us on more, and how they want to circle their buses as well as the drop-off. It's not an easy fix.
Yeah, I don't
It
think,
was never designed that way.
yeah, I don't think we should just be handed the problem and say, no, you guys fix it.
Exactly.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, if there's nothing else for.
I have a question, because we're talking about different departments in the city intertwining, like with the interactive stools. So I'm confused because there's a little note on these postcards. It says compliments of the Historic Main Street Board, but it's got the Tourism Board logo on it.
I can speak for Jay, if you'd like.
Anybody go?
Sure. My husband is on the Main Street Board,
Right.
and he did that, and the Historic Main Street logo, and the tourism logo are that logo. And
Oh,
so
okay.
that is, for all of you, that's the banner project. Those are the banners that we are expecting to be delivered tomorrow.
So is there
And so-
any interaction between Historic Main Street and?
Actually, Tourism Board approved a grant for the Main Street Board for marketing
Okay.
and the banners, the postcards, and some wayfinding signage that I think is still in the works.
Yeah, so tourism paid for that as well. yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, so there's 18 different ones and they're all gonna be banners and it's gonna be cool.
Well, the time is now 6:36, and we end the work session.
Feels like I'm in this.
Let's go ahead and we have a special meeting coming up, and it's actually going to be, we'll have a couple items on it, so. Let's go ahead and take a short session break. Yes. 5 to 10 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes.